Welcome to the 60 Plus podcast.
I'm Janet.
And I'm Joe. How are you today, Janet?
You know what? I'm feeling really good.
Are you?
Yeah.
That's great. Because 2 episodes ago you went, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And last time you said, I'm good. And now you're really good. So
Yes.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Any reason in particular you're really good?
I think it's the glass of Bueno Vista that we had before we did this
Glass of
podcast
Cabernet?
today. Yeah. Yeah. This may be the first podcast where we actually had a drink before we did it.
Well, we were doing some research and we had a glass of wine.
Called for a glass of wine.
So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, we're going to do a Mythbuster that baby boomers are responsible for all the woes in the world, according to millennials. And
Who
apparently,
listens to millennials?
I know, but apparently, this article, Gen Xers, this is the title of the article. Get this. Why do many Gen Xers and millennials hate baby boomers? That's so harsh.
It is harsh.
Mhm.
Hate's a strong word.
It is. It is. This is from Psychology Today. It was written by Lawrence R. Samuel, PhD. We're going to talk about this article because it summarizes what we've been hearing about this generational conflict.
Well, I think we mentioned it in the last episode where you'll occasionally hear "Okay, Boomer,"
Right.
and it goes deeper than that. That's
Right.
kind of a little bit of a joke, but
Right. And we also talked about it when we were talking about the demographic of baby boomers and how by 2034, there'll be more of us and then we'll be children and that we have a huge buying power. And he does mention in this article about how marketers kind of missed the boat on that. So, it'll be interesting. We're going to run through this with everybody and see what we think.
all right. So, what does Dr. Samuel have to say?
Well, the first thing he talks about is too bad I don't have my glasses. He talks about that what exactly the baby boomer is defined as. So, what are the traits that may be spurring this, dare I say it, hatred, misunderstanding?
Sure.
Okay. So it's based on these summative traits, if you will, of the generation. Of course, it's generalized, right? But basically, they're saying, and we can take these one at a time, that our generation is oriented towards prosperity and abundance.
All right. It's a criticism. I understand the criticism, but I don't think it's specific to boomers.
Well, I don't think it's really a criticism. I mean, when I think about abundance, one of the things that you learn, like again, meditation, I talk about this a lot, is to manifest based on a view of abundance, to look for what's beautiful in the world or what's right in the world and to have that positive orientation. Is that a bad thing?
Well, the way Dr. Samuel refers to it, he says many Gen Xers and millennials view baby boomers as hogging the economy and world resources for their own. That might be the abundance that he's talking about.
Okay, perhaps, but let's get through the list of the traits first, and then we can talk about how those are interpreted.
Okay.
So the second one is a consumerist ethos.
So you have a better handle on this than I do. We're the generation after what's referred to as the Great Generation.
Right, the silent generation.
So just post
They were
World
in
War
the
II.
World War. We were after the post, after the wars, right? So we didn't have that specifically, maybe growing up. It was post World War II, but we had Vietnam.
We had Vietnam, but World War II was kind of a different thing. I remember my parents talking about rationing and victory gardens.
Yes, I remember that too.
And a lot
My
of
parents-
sacrifice,
They
right?
grew up during the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my mother talking about how her father worked for AT&T or Bell Labs or whatever it was at the time. They were the only phone on the entire street in the entire neighborhood.
Which isn't surprising. I mean,
Right.
it might be surprising to millennials and Gen Zers
Definitely.
because
Like
we all have phones in our pocket now.
Right,
They
right.
don't even know what a wired telephone looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen this video? I've seen it on YouTube, and a father offers his kids, I think, $10 if they could dial a phone. It's like a regular handset
Right.
on a old style telephone, and they didn't know how to do it. They didn't know what a dial tone was. They didn't know how to
No.
dial it.
Why would they?
No, they wouldn't.
Right.
So going from your mother's story of being the only house on the street that had a phone to everyone having a computer.
Right. It's a different world. So we can start there and say, hey, don't judge us harshly, right?
No, right.
It's like you grew up in a totally, totally different environment than we did. But okay, let's move on from that. So a comfort with peer pressure. Okay. I don't know what that equates to.
A comfort with peer pressure. Is that like succumbing to peer pressure or just applying peer pressure to get
Maybe
people to do
group
things?
think. I mean, I don't know. These are what he suggests are the traits of our generation. An acceptance of great expectations.
Why is that a bad
But
thing?
I don't know. But haven't you heard people say, lower your expectations and you won't be disappointed? I find that to be kind of sad. It's like, I want to have great expectations. I want to have dreams. I want to have visions of what can be, as long as they're not like delusional.
As long as you're not like a megalomaniac.
Exactly. Like, what is wrong with having great expectations? I don't know. Is it maybe they think it's naive?
No, I think they think we're grandiose by having
Perhaps.
big
Perhaps.
goals. But without those goals, where would the world be?
You have to have goals to, and then you have to have an action plan, of course, to get there. But I don't find these terrible traits. The next one is, and again, another trait that I don't find terrible, an acquaintance with social and political turmoil. Parentheses, the civil rights and feminist movement, Vietnam, assassinations, Watergate.
So,
End quote.
so
End parenth.
what was it again?
An acceptance with social and political turmoil.
There's been social and political turmoil since the beginning of time, in the beginning of America.
Accepting it suggests that we're inactive about it. See, to me, that kind of goes against the grain. If you think about the Vietnam War, we were out on the streets, right? So, again, I think that that may be a harsh summation, but we will talk about how they translate it in a second. So, let's just keep an open mind here. An idealist philosophy,
Why is that a bad thing?
I don't know. A rebellious streak and a distrust of institutions. Well, now that's okay.
My theory about that is it all started with Watergate.
True. But you know what? Trust of institutions has plowed
All
down
time
in
low.
past
All time low. I
generations.
just heard a
You
podcast
can't pin
recently.
that on us.
Just heard a podcast recently. Gallup has been tracking trust in institutions since the 70s. It's an all-time low.
Yep.
Everything except the military and small businesses. Everything. Big business, Congress,
Supreme
Supreme
Court.
Court, everything.
Right.
Everything. Military. The military was always kind of way up there, and it's even come down.
Yeah, sure. And then lastly, a generally liberal social attitude.
So there was the 60s and the 70s, I think it introduced a liberal kind of sexual ethos, right?
Right. Now we have gender identity.
Well, even broader than that is hookup culture. You can't get much more liberal than that.
Right. But in actuality, I think what's happening now is a little bit different than just throwing yourself in bed with somebody. I don't know a lot about this, but I know a little bit about it. And I think there's actually celibacy is.
Oh, it's a big problem. Teen pregnancies are down, which is good, and
Thank God.
but pregnancy is down with married
Right.
couples.
Birth rate is down. Yeah.
That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And that's not good.
Well, and that's not just this country, that's around the world. Birth rate is going down.
Which is
And
kind of a
that's-
difficult problem. And
Well, especially for institutions that want to fuel the labor force, but that's another subject altogether. This is the last one, actually. Being natives to the analog world and immigrants to the digital world.
all right, so millennials are natives and we're immigrants.
Right.
We could only be immigrants. The technology world didn't. You talked about your mom being the only phone on the street.
Right.
The technology wasn't there. I remember when we got an extension telephone in the family room in our house, which was in the basement. It's very fancy. And that was like a big deal.
Yeah.
The technology wasn't there. I
I
remember.
remember one of my first jobs working for an advertising agency. They got a fax machine. And it was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
So the technology wasn't available to us to be native in.
Right. So you can't fault us for that. Wah, wah, wah.
I know, right? All right. So
Don't hate us.
what does Dr. Samuel say in response?
Okay, so he's saying that this is how they translate all of that, I guess. All those characters.
Before we get to that,
Yeah.
there was one thing that I thought was interesting.
Well, please tell.
He says that there's always been generational hostility, generational
Mhm.
differences. And I'm going to quote: "There seems to be a special effort being made by many Gen Xers and millennials to create a contentious relationship with baby boomers. Younger adults tend to view older people and the aging experience itself in negative terms."
Yeah.
Now, people will frequently say, "Oh, it's lousy getting older," and I always say it beats the alternative.
Right.
So, because there is no alternative, but to view it in negative terms, the aging process in negative terms, there's no choice.
No, we don't want to do that. But, the whole ageism thing he goes on to say is ageism too is behind the current wave of boomer bashing and the aging experience itself in negative terms. We are a society obsessed by youth.
We are,
So,
but less so.
here, and this is exactly why this podcast exists.
Mhm.
And this is the myth that we're busting, right? So let's move on to how they interpret this into, what we're at fault for. So here we go. Boomers hogged the economy and the world's resources for their own financial gain and or consumptive habits.
All right, let's just, for the sake of argument, say that that's true.
Mm-hmm.
If it didn't happen, millennials wouldn't have the lives and the lifestyles that they have now. They wouldn't have the technology that they have because that was all
Fueled it.
it did. It
Mhm.
did. And having lofty goals. Computers would not have been invented. They wouldn't have their phones in their pockets. They wouldn't have the technology that they're blaming us for not being natives of.
Right.
They wouldn't have the lives that they have. They wouldn't have the lifestyles that they have.
Right. Right.
So it just kind of confounds me as to
Well,
how.
the other thing that I find a little baffling about this whole consumptive trash that we're getting thrown out here-
Consumerism and
Yeah. Okay. What about Amazon? I have seen millennials order a thing of toothpaste or a thing of sunscreen from Amazon that comes in a big, huge box that has traveled for miles and miles and miles. And
talk about
let's-
hogging the world's resources.
Exactly. And that is purely on convenience and what I want, when I want it, where I want it.
I don't have as much of a problem with that because, no, I don't, because it does fuel the economy in a way. Janet's screeching silently.
Silent scream.
I know what you're getting at.
Tube toothpaste. Go to CVS, like, really?
Well,
Let me order this mascara that's going to be in a large 8x10 box with a lot of plastic around it. Oh, but okay, we're
we're
responsible
hogging the world's
for,
resources, yes.
and we're responsible for climate change.
Okay. All right. So you just busted that myth right there.
Right there.
The whole consumerism
Right
thing.
there.
They're as bad at consumerism as boomers are, if it's a
Yes,
bad thing.
and this follows
Making air
on.
quotes bad.
Exactly. And this falls on to the next thing that's thought of us is they are often seen as greedy and wasteful. So all those boxes that you have to get rid of that you probably throw in the trash, it's like I see them on the streets in the city. Most of the trash is Amazon boxes and HelloFresh and all the other convenience items. Not to mention the old IKEA furniture that they're done with.
Do you like
I
putting
love
IKEA
IKEA.
furniture together?
I love putting IKEA furniture
It's fun.
together. So, moving on. Okay. So, with regard to what future generations, what did you do? Did you just take some of my wine?
No, I took it away.
Give it
I
back
put it out of
before I
arm's
hurt
reach.
you. So, in short, the sorry state of the world, right?
It's all fault. It's all our fault. You know whose fault it is? It's my fault.
It's Joe. It's your fault. It's always your fault. It's always your fault. So, but the thing that I like about this article that goes on to say about how, marketers insist on focusing on the age of older consumers and then they profile us in a way that is not, relevant. Just like I think millennials are profiling us in a way. And that we're all humans and we just need to understand each other. It was funny, I was at a coffee shop this morning and I was sitting there waiting for a long time because I wanted to shop local. So I didn't go fast into, this place or that place. I like to support my local shop owners and waiting for a long time. But I just happened to notice the line of people because it was in the city. So it was mostly millennials. They all look so sad
Were they sad or angry or a combination?
or just like pouty.
Hmm.
They had these little faces on.
This is a podcast. No one can see.
And I was like, oh my God, it's the land of the sad millennials. This is not good. I really
Was the
don't.
internet down or something?
I really don't know, but they all had tight pants on. I did notice that.
Huh.
I think that's the thing to wear now. Forget
Well,
the
is it like the Grinch that stole Christmas and his
forget the
pants are too
khakis.
tight?
No. Forget the khakis with the pleats. You have to wear like super tight pants now.
Well, we talked last week about my daughter got married and I had to get a new suit. It was much tighter fitting than the old suits
because
that
a millennial fitted you for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the style.
Yeah, so this is a reason why they're all grimacing. Their pants are too tight. It has nothing to do with us and what
It's got nothing to do with consumerism
or
and
being positive or
having lofty goals.
succumbing to peer pressure.
It's their pants are too tight.
Their pants are too tight. Just loosen up your pants and you'll be fine.
It's like after Thanksgiving dinner. Just loosen your pants.
Put on the sweatpants. Yeah.
They do put on the sweatpants and they wear their pajamas out
But
too.
even the Lululemon pants are tight now. I know
They've
this.
always been tight.
No, for the men, they're like,
Does Lululemon pants for men?
yeah. Oh, you don't know this, Joe.
I did know that. I did know
What are
that.
you, a boomer? Come on.
I am a boomer,
Yeah.
but I did know that. I was just kind of
Yeah.
making it sound good.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm just saying that.
So what can we do about this?
Well, I think, the upshot is that we all have to remember we're human and that age is, it's just, I'm not going to say it's just a number, but we have all dealt with the same frustrations, the same challenges, the same life wonders. And if we could all just get back to the common good and
Can't we all just get along?
yeah, is that a Beatles song?
No, it's what Rodney King said after the
Oh,
riots
geez.
in LA.
Okay. All right. We don't want to talk about that, but because that's negative and boomers don't like to talk about negative stuff.
I read the quote before. There seems to be a special effort to make it more contentious than in past generations. And
Yeah. It's funny because if we reversed this, we think about how we think about millennials, and we've probably, we've joked about it, but it's, snowflakes and they seem to be whiny. And I think they do have a negative orientation, and that's kind of sad.
is it the pants?
Yeah, I think it's the pants.
The pants are too tight.
Yeah.
Who do we talk to about this? Do we need to talk to some fashion designers to say, just
Wait,
give us a half an
local
inch?
seamstress.
Give us a half an inch in the pants and the world will be better. I know what you're saying. I'm kind of making light of it, but there's an aspect of ageism to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the special effort to make it more contentious is what kind of bothers me about it.
Right.
Your daughter went off to college at one point. Did you notice right before they went off to college, maybe like senior year in high school, junior and senior year, it's a little bit more contentious. some pushback?
Well, I don't
That's
think that,
normal.
yeah, it is normal. It is normal because they're trying to spread their wings. They want to
Mhm.
show that they're independent. And that means resisting you and your love, for however long. They don't want to be coddled. They don't, want to be. Although when they need something, you're the first call.
But this is different.
Mm-hmm.
This is not that. This
Yeah.
is blaming boomers for all the ills of the world.
Right. I think too, it's maybe part of the power structure too. Like unless you're working for an organization that's very young through and through, most likely your boss or somebody who's running the company will be in a different generation. And that may provoke some of these feelings. I mean, I think that if I look back at my career and, working in a very male dominated company with older men, you do feel that generational gap and gender gap too.
Hmm.
Now, maybe that's not so much at issue, one would hope, but that's why I would say ageism is always going to thrive. It's never going to go away. I really don't think it will.
Well, I think that that's natural
Mm-hmm.
to a degree. But when you blaming your parents or even your grandparents for ruining the world,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of what we're talking about, they're blaming us for climate change. They're blaming us for hogging the world's resources. I don't know that that's necessarily accurate. There may be some truth in it,
Yeah.
but it has provided what the life that they have.
I like this thing that he says in the article too. Ageist thinking prescribes a marketing approach steeped in a consciousness of age and specifically negative feelings about older age. So maybe it's not just what they think, but it's more what they're fed. If you think about the media, there is a profiling, which is kind of silly and discriminatory. And marketers, and I said this in a previous podcast, they don't get it. So many marketers are focusing on the age of older consumers and they have this like image of what that is. I think in the end, it's all about where you put your energies and where you put your money and where you put your thoughts and attitudes and beliefs. And breaking those down, of course, is always going to be a challenge. But again, kumbaya.
I say very frequently is put yourself in the other person's position. Try and
Mm-hmm.
look at the situation from the other person's perspective.
Right.
I think most people, regardless of generation, I think most people are well intentioned. But what you're saying is they're being fed a line
Mm-hmm.
that they rely on as excuse for something.
Right. Well, in the end, we always have to say in this podcast, did we actually bust the myth?
I think we busted partially.
Why there should be such a myth?
Well,
We busted their misperception about what we're responsible for.
we at least raised the thinking around it
Mm-hmm.
and maybe have given listeners an opportunity to think about it themselves. The demographic that listens to this is not millennials
No.
for the most part, which is unfortunate because
Right.
they would be hearing our viewpoint
Right.
on this.
But I would love to hear stories of, from people about what they think about what we were just talking about and if they've had experiences, in this nature and what thoughts they have. And they can do that. They can share those with us, right, Joe?
They can send an email to 60pluspodcast@gmail.com. It's 60, and then the rest is spelled out 60pluspodcast@gmail.com. And tell us your story. Tell us what you've encountered in any kind of contentious situation with millennials or Gen Xers.
Yeah.
Keep it short.
And also, or tell us what other myths you would like us to tackle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, 60pluspodcast@gmail.com. And if you're listening on Spotify, there's room for comments.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
So you can leave comments in the Spotify play.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from our listeners. And I specifically loved when we did the vote about who do you like best.
Yeah, you would like that because
Yeah.
it was 100% Janet. So, well, I think that might wrap up this episode of the 60 Plus podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to mention before we
No,
sign off?
I think we're good. Thank you. This is fun.
It was. And maybe we should have a glass of wine before every episode.
Maybe we will.
All right. Until next time, I'm Joe.
And I'm Janet.
This is the 60
Bye.
Plus podcast.
Bye.